All right, so let's get this going. Okay, so we're back to Aristotle, week 6, and we're going to cover metaphysics. Now, metaphysics has garnished itself a rather bad name, and this is not because of what it should be. This is because of the quackery that people have associated with the word metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of all things around physics, etc. And if you really want to go into sort of theoretical nature of many aspects of society, then um, going into the explanations larger than physics itself are an essential part. So if you think for a moment, as a sort of physicist yourself, Ryan, um, one of the aspects of theory would be like putting out alternative hypotheses, such as sort of a theory of a multiverse, theory of parallel universes, theory of how like Big Bang may or may not end, whether there'll be a big crunch, a tear, etc. And all of these are theoretical constructs that someone can then build a theory from. Even string theory itself is a mathematical construct at the moment and isn't truly physics or science, but would be either metaphysics or metascience at the moment. Although there are a lot of scientists who will just say that it's mathematics, but that's how these things start. So we're going to cover again some of the aspects of let's see, first principles, cause of things, etc. Law of the excluded middle, non-contradiction, all of these fun topics that I've always liked to harp on. In this world of non-binary, we're going to focus on true, false, and a very binary aspect of sort of reality. So let's get going. Introduction. All right, so it's the science of science. Bertrand Russell covered a lot of these topics around 100 years ago, and what we're trying to figure out some of the explanations of sort of the philosophy of science in a way as well, which is actually, strangely enough, a topic I'm doing at the moment at Birkbeck. So I'm doing sort of the philosophy of science as actually a topic of study in itself. And understanding whether we're talking about does science really describe the world? Is it just useful? May to a lot of non-philosophers out there seem pointless, but these actually can come back and help us define whether we're really describing the universe, whether we are getting something that will align with what we're doing or not. So we're trying to think of the real foundations of what reality is. So at its heart, let's take the example from a more modern perspective. When we're doing a scientific theory and an experiment to test these things, are we really finding the fundamental aspect of reality in our universe? So some people even now will say that we're not. So we have a debate over people who are realists, those who believe that science is a useful tool, but it doesn't actually explain reality, and then those who don't even believe in science. But anyway, that's a different matter altogether. So I'll also say that this is sort of the basis of going into logic and the foundations of reality. So if we start with a ruling axiom that there is no non-contradiction, we can't have something that is simultaneously true and false. And if we go through logic, we will easily find that out, because you start thinking about if there is something that is false but is also true, what does that mean? So
anything at all. I mean, you can famously derive any statement whatsoever from a contradiction, so it means your language is totally useless.
exactly, and that's the point. If we're going to actually argue with another person, with having a point, trying to imbue and instill knowledge and education, then if we don't actually agree on a set of definitions and then agree to have enough intellectual honesty to accept that something that is not true must be false, and that something that is not false must be true. Now, whether we agree that there is enough evidence is a different point.
Yeah,
you can see that's totally different. So, what we're going to look at is at the heart of objective reality, whether it's common day experience, whether it's measurement, etc. Where do we get to? Later, we get to others like Berkeley and Hume, who were empiricists in a way, but also more didn't go into anything that they couldn't really see or understand. If you can't really see it, if you're looking through a magnifying glass, that's one thing. But if you're looking through an electron microscope, are you really seeing the object? And people will question that. Now, that's arguable in a way because we mathematically define something that helps us understand and represent it. And I've worked on MFMs and etc. before, and what you display on the screen isn't necessarily what I would call an objective reality, but it is mathematically something that helps us describe how things work. So there are still those who don't believe in the law of non-contradiction, that people should be able to have these differences, but that then becomes.
Can I ask you, I got a couple of questions just on your personal opinion on some of these things, Greg. I mean, so on that one, you had some, you wrote something recently about objective truth. Is it objectively true that there is, that you cannot contradict yourself, or is this a convention that is useful? And how do you see what that is?
Well, of course, it's axiomic from Aristotle there. If you accept that axiom, then everything else in logic flows. If you don't, then you can't create any logical statements. You can't create mathematics. So if you want to believe that the world is really floating on the back of 4 elephants standing, who have a turtle standing on them, etc., then I can't really stop you. But equally, you could be solipsistic and believe that everything's in your own mind and this is a dream, and you might wake up. I mean, I can't disprove that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say that my own mind is here, but how do I tell you that, hey, I exist, and have you believe it, and that I'm not a dream?
Yeah. So it sounds, I mean, so your argument to me sounds like it is useful, but there's no way to prove it one way or the other, because if somebody doesn't accept it, you can't prove anything to them. So it's a useful convention.
Fairly much. I would actually accept that it is reality. But equally, you have those people who will say, oh, but how do we know? How do we know we're not in the Matrix? I mean, this is the old, the question of Neo, etc. How do we really know that we are not in the Matrix?
Yeah, I mean, there is no way to know whether you're, I mean, I don't know.
I mean, it could be the Descartes and his sort of demon who had entrapped him in some sort of magical thought bubble. I think, therefore I am, but what about outside here? Maybe this demon is projecting the entire world on me. I mean, so he goes into saying that he didn't believe that, but and equally I would say that I don't believe that too. I think we get into a whole lot of useless problems if we do. Going through life believing that it's a dream and that it might disappear any moment has been something that many societies have done, but if you think of it from a common sense point of view, it doesn't really help you. It doesn't define anything.
Yeah.
It might get you to a scenario where you want to do a Mayan sort of festival and cut someone's heart out to keep the sun rising tomorrow, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, can I ask another complimentary question then, just pertaining to the earlier, which is your view of science? Like, do you think science is true? Or also, or again, like, is this like a useful sort of useful discoveries or something that aren't here?
I'm sort of in the Bayesian realist type camp. I don't think science is true. I think we have a handle on the truth, so to speak. I think gradually we get moving back and forwards and oscillating. We generally get closer to the truth. So I won't say that what we have at any point is truth, or that we'll ever get to 100% truth, but it is the best representation of truth that we could expect to have.
Okay. It's about the search for truth, isn't it? It's the tools that science is more of like a toolkit that we use to investigate the truth. And I mean, if you look back, you can see that what we thought was true many times has been upended through the scientific process and having better testing, better methods, better hypotheses to test.
Yeah, we can go into things like the argument through miracles and all these other sort of alternatives, but the thing is that it works, it continues to work, it continues to get better, but two, everything seems to point to fairly much this is reality. Whether we can get beyond that, that's another question. I mean, the sort of physics of what if there's other universes? Well, we can't actually determine that. And I know people sit there going, but what if? But we can't. I know I'm being rather negative on science here, but by definition, if it's outside our universe, we can't actually get outside our universe. This isn't Star Trek where we rip a hole in the fabric of space-time. And I mean, that sounds great, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
Yeah. So I mean, I do like that science does actually oftentimes disprove something that somebody has spoken about for a long time. You know, look, we're still looking for dark matter. They've never found a motive it, and people are now starting to say, actually, well, we think there are other models that can show how these forces exist without the need for this. And so it's really now we're starting to move away from what we thought was true about reality to something else, and that's through application of the scientific method.
Well, with the standard model of particle physics, the Higgs boson was found, but there should be more after it that we're not finding. So that's proving problematic, and we keep going. But if you just give us a bigger grant, we'll build a bigger,
a larger collider.
A larger collider, well, we said there'd be one here, then we said there'd be one here. We haven't figured out where there'd be another one, but maybe if you give us more money, we will. It gets to a point where you start going, well, you were wrong. You were wrong. How much money are we going to throw? Yeah, it gets to that point. So anyway, everything to Aristotle is defined by substance in some form. That can be energy, it can be matter, it can be something, but he really goes into everything can be defined, and we can actually put out a definition, we can collect evidence, etc. So metaphysics is being as such, the study of reality, the study of existence and all things. And I know some people will sit there going, this is fluffy, but this is something fluffy that has given us logic, the foundations of mathematics, a whole lot of paradoxes.
Can I ask another question about that? This is a bit of a sort of scholarship question, but so is this one, because I know that Aristotle is famous for having invented logic or written it, whatever it is. Is this the book where he did this, or is there another book where he talks about logic itself?
Oh, he's got many more books. So, okay. But he starts going into some of the foundations of logic here. But no, he goes in and defines his whole system of logic.
I'm sure there is another one that's literally called logic.
Yes. So yeah, he goes into a lot more detail later. But this forms the foundation.
I see. But this is earlier. So he did that one later because he does talk about the basic aspects of logic.
Correct.
Non-contradiction.
This forms the axioms that are needed for logic.
Okay.
Without that axiom, you can't even start logic.
Yeah. Okay.
So there are some problems with the logic of Aristotle, but remember, Aristotle's logical foundations, his mathematical forms, stood for 2,200 years. So without anyone going, oh, there's a problem. And now we sit there going, oh, Aristotle, he's got lots of problems. At least when you get into postgraduate level logic. And people go, oh, but if you, yeah, but that's the whole thing. Once you get up to a certain level, you find people have done something wrong or made an error. And I'm sorry, but even Aristotle made these errors, but it was good enough that it withstood scrutiny for 2,200 years. So that's not bad. Not many people, even Newton didn't manage to do that. So denial of unity for opposites does not exclude them, but differentiates them. And what we're really getting at here is if we don't have the axioms of science through first principles, we can't actually do any of these differentiations, then we don't even have science. We can't create something where we do a hypothesis test, even in the probabilistic aspects of this. We need to either reject or accept something. And if you don't go back to the foundation that there is a binary difference, then reject and accept itself, how do you differentiate them? So, I mean, you logically need to actually think that contradictions are a problem. Now, there are contradictions that exist. And here's the but. That means there is a problem. Now, some people will say, oh, mathematically in the real world, but we also know that mathematics isn't this world. I know a lot of people would love to have math being here, but there are a lot of paradoxes, contradictions, etc., that don't equate in mathematics. We know that we cannot create a self-referential system of mathematics from within mathematics. We have to step outside. So black and white, for instance, are contradictory terms. You cannot be a black swan and a white swan simultaneously. You can be a speckled swan, you can be a gray swan, you can be many other things, but you cannot simultaneously be a black swan and a white swan. You cannot be simultaneously a man and a woman, despite what some people will tell you. So you cannot simultaneously have either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome in that sort of way. So, I mean, that's then coming into different terms. So gender is different to biology. And of course, if you want to mix up the terms and the definitions, you get into a whole pile of seeming contradictions, but they're not really contradictions. So as it says there, metaphysics has been misrepresented and abused. Lots of people love to misrepresent all of these things, and that's part of the problem that we see. We've got romanticized ideas, wouldn't it be better if type ideas going, even in modern, and you look at some of the earlier works of Eliot or others, some of the romantics, the poets before them, Byron, etc. And there is this idea, wouldn't it be nice if? Typical utopian thinking. I mean, it sounds great. Wouldn't it be nice? But some things we don't get to change, despite what we want to think of things. This sort of some of the aspects of reality are there, and doesn't matter if we don't like them, they don't change. So we've got some early introduction to Greek thought around this book as well, which is quite good. It gives us some of the history of the other philosophers that we have lost apart from the works of Aristotle. Although, remember, the thing is, Aristotle's not always going to be completely accurate himself. We've already seen that in a few things. And I'm not picking on old Aristotle. I quite like Aristotle. But the thing to remember is, like every human, us humans aren't computers. We're not unobjective, unbiased, sort of perfect individuals who don't have opinions that we, I mean, I certainly do. I get told all the time in my writing that I should be less biased on certain things, especially if I'm ever writing on Bitcoin. And what we need to try and do to understand our world is start defining everything in a way that allows us to have arguments that are based in logic. So you've probably seen many times, for instance, on Slack, I talk about different types of logical fallacies. Many of the different arguments we see in the internet, on Twitter, etc., are derived because of logical fallacies. And this is one of the terms that why, for instance, Plato didn't like the sophists. It's not basing things on truth, but so the idea given was the sophist cared more about winning than truth. And they didn't like teaching people to argue and debate all sides, even if you knew that it wasn't true. Now, there's good and bad in that. Being able to learn how to debate and take both sides can be good. We do it on debate clubs, universities, societies, everything now. But equally, that's because we don't actually always know what the truth, and the process of getting to the truth should be one of putting reasoned evidence. So Aristotle will say that the mere reason we are different to all other creatures is reason, logic, rationality. Not that all humans are rational, but this is something that animals don't have. It's this deep thought set, the planning, the processing that we have that no other creature does. It enables us to have art, to have science, to have discourse and planning and strategy. So, like it or not, no other animal does this. We've taught apes to use tools, very rudimentary, basic type things. We've taught apes to do some basic sign language or even writing, but we still haven't managed to go beyond that into rational thought. So Aristotle would even argue that young children aren't sort of expressing rational thought. So,
and it's also that, like, humans teaching apes to do these things is very different from apes developing those
correct.
techniques on their own.
Although after they've been taught, some apes continue to teach other apes in their tribes. So,
okay.
And the argument could be given in a Promethean way, that Prometheus came down there and gave us fire, which also represented culture and knowledge. So not that we can prove or disprove that one either. I mean, you've got the aliens coming down to Earth and instructing us cavemen bit through lots of movie and literature sources. So art is one of the most profound and sublime activities that humanity can conduct, according to Aristotle. In some ways, I believe that as well. That's why in some aspects of this, I'll actually call many forms of modern art anti-art, because in trying not to be kitsch, they've actually become more kitsch than kitsch. I mean, if you look at Andy Warhol, saying I'm being new by doing something, I'm pointing the finger at kitsch. Yeah, you can do that maybe once, and then if you make a career out of it, all you're doing is embracing kitsch. You're embracing sort of a popularist culture, and it goes even worse than that. I mean, I'm sorry, but the putting a urinal up and putting a name on it still is not art. I mean, I can see the point that is being made. I've actually studied it at a postgraduate level. I've written a paper on the topic, but I will still call it anti-art. It isn't capturing the sublime and sort of uplifting emotional spirit. And that's the distinction here. So let's go a bit further and continue with this. So we continue to build in science and technology. And the thing is, that always has a double edge to it. So as we discover something good, we also find ways of misusing it. Art here to Aristotle is the practical, science is the theoretical. We've had that differentiation throughout our history, but the arts, the crafts, etc., go well beyond just sort of the basics, but going right into the detail of trying to capture the inner aspects of humanity as well. Same with mathematics, not just seeking pragmatic, but also finding patterns and finding ways of doing things. And there are many who still find that this is a waste of time and effort. I, on the other hand, think if we just chucked a whole lot of extra money into some real investment into pure mathematics, that would actually be a good thing. The reason being, there are many sort of solutions in mathematics that no one argued were ever going to be useful, and sometimes took 100 years for a use to suddenly appear. Even sort of elliptic curve mathematics, very useful, yet people for a long time thought, what the hell do you want to do with this stuff?
I thought that it was very interesting in the book that Aristotle always seemed to bring it back to, and there's mathematics at the center of this way of thinking. And I've always been of the opinion that mathematics really does lead science. So science is really testing things that we can describe mathematically. And it's the outcomes of science that determine what we can do in engineering. You know, if it hasn't been scientifically tested and the mathematics weren't there to create the science, we can't build it.
Correct. And as it says up there, just seeking knowledge for its own sake has sort of a lot of benefit in many areas. Of course, we can be ridiculous in that, and there are limits to everything. And whether you get a grant or funding for it is a different issue, and complaining that no one wants to fund you is a different issue. So the knowledge of causal events, understanding how, why, when, where, etc., is very important. So we want to try and understand from first principles how things work, why things work, and in doing this, this is how we create science. So we have a number of sort of different causes according to Aristotle. He's really systematized everything. I mean, I think I would have got on very well with him personally. He's very formal. He's very mathematical. If you had it, I would say he's probably an Aspie, but who knows? He's a bit that way. We've got the material cause for a table there, which is what's it made of. You can't describe the table because it's wood, because chairs can be wood too. The final cause, why is the table there? It's because someone wants to use it as a desk, a dining table. The formal cause, the design, how it's going to be constructed, what the length of each piece of wood is going to be, etc. And then the efficient cause. Someone has to actually make the item. All of these different causes describe different parts of it. And one of the things Aristotle did point out, that there are lots of different partial explanations before he came along. But then he put all of these together to really define the object fully. So if you don't have all of these, then you don't really understand in full. So let's see, getting up to examining of earlier work. So old Aristotle doesn't just sit there and build his own system. He analyzes what went before him, which is magnificent for a historical point of view as well. Some of the other sort of philosophers at the time, we have very, very little, if anything. Heraclitus, of course, we've got a little bit of stuff. Heraclitus and his idea of a river. We've got Thales, Empedocles, but in analyzing these guys, Aristotle is also proven to be the first real sort of critic and sort of proper academic. He didn't just come along and say, this is my thing, believe me. He actually took all of the other works that he could find and analyzed them fully and said, okay, so Empedocles said and explained it and then said, okay, I think he's missing something here. This is a good explanation, but it doesn't really get to the heart of everything. Anaxagoras and others, the source of movement can be defined from the material and efficient causes, but what about the rest? So in arguing that the universe is created through a single unchanging substance, how do you then define something from there? So if we don't get into the different causes and we leave holes, then it becomes something that we haven't really explained. Parmenides was one of the monistic schools, basically saying ultimate reality exists. Also, only ultimate reality exists, and that we are a thought or dream of God, which I mentioned before. So Parmenides would say that we're in the matrix and we're part of something that is a machine program, or we like to believe that we're actually there, but who knows, we could disappear at any moment. So don't know if I'd go that far personally. I prefer to believe that the universe isn't going to disappear, and I'm not going to wake up after I have a dream and find that the universe has been restarted. So Heraclitus argued sensible things must change and cannot be known. Heraclitus, of course, is the guy who argued you cannot step in the same river twice. The definition really comes down to this. Is it the same river? The water might be changing, the level of water, the amount of flow, but it's still really the same river. It's the argument also, if I replace a plank of this boat, this trireme, and then I do another one and an oar, and over time, after everything's been replaced, rebuilt, reconstructed, is it the same boat? So depends on how you define it. And we get a contradiction only if our definitions aren't well defined. So this makes us go back and actually correctly define what we're talking about. So what is a boat? I mean, this is why philosophers sit there having arguments all day. Once we agree, that's fine, but we have to debate all day about what is and isn't. So, yeah, Plato had this concept that ideas and forms represent the cause of things. So to Plato, there was an idealized triangle somewhere, a perfect triangle that everything could be matched against. Now, that in itself, in my opinion, has problems, because then you would need an infinite number of triangles, because to me, you'd have to have the perfect isosceles triangle of a certain size and angle, the perfect equilateral triangle that is this size, and the perfect one at that size. Just going all day. I mean, and I think it's more the representation personally. The ideal lives in our mind, and we represent that on the world. We project it, but that's my opinion. Very different to either Plato or the Pythagoreans. So Pythagoreans, well, most people know who they are. They've heard of Pythagoras. They don't really know the history. It was a very interesting cult. There was trying to remember his name, can't remember his name, mathematician who in the early days discovered that there were irrational numbers, and caused a whole lot of problems for the other Pythagoreans who believed that there's no such thing as a irrational number. And as a result, the poor guy got killed because, well, you challenge someone's beliefs and they don't always react nicely. So, oh, bugger, you proved us wrong mathematically. We're going to tie rocks to you and throw you in the river. Yay. We don't treat people who innovate and prove other people to be incorrect very well in this universe. But
yeah, I'm just thinking, well, at least I'm just thinking in my mind how that compares to Twitter these days with canceling and things like this. Maybe Twitter is actually an improvement over just murdering people for disagreeing with you.
Murder
yeah.
by words.
Yeah, a little bit. So we also have problems when we get into abstractions. How do we really define certain things such as love and justice, politics? We've already started covering some of these topics, but when we're talking about an atom we can define to a certain extent, but contrary to what some people will tell you, we don't really know what it is. We don't know whether an electron is a point particle, whether it is a vibrating string, whether it's a brain. We don't know why it can pop in and out of existence. We don't have an explanation about how it moves, how it jumps around. We've got silly old models of the plum pudding model, but we know that that's actually wrong, but we still teach children and hope that they'll forget it afterwards. As Professor Cohen, physicist, said, lies we teach children. We teach them one lie, and then when they get more advanced, we replace it with the next lie. So what we're trying to do, though, is understand the empirical and the descriptions of the world at its heart. So mathematics has a strong link with philosophy, and especially when we look at areas such as logic and even set theory. Set theory, the definition of topics, many of these other categorization structure theories will give us a very strong link into certain aspects of philosophy. So one of the things I've done in studying philosophy in the past, it was I did a lot of logic at postgraduate level. And of course, Bitcoin is a logic system. If you think about it, it's a predicate. And with a predicate, we have very simple. It is true or false. There is an out of the system alternative, which is we haven't put the problem up to be tested yet, or equally we could argue that it is neither true or false because it hasn't been defined at this point. But none of those are going to bother us for the purpose of, does the transaction validate? It either does or it doesn't. That simple. So nice and binary, as terrible as that sounds to some universities that I'm associated with. Now, Aristotle doesn't like the Platonists. He had a bit of an argument with some of them. He didn't think that ideas themselves cause anything. I mean, they can impact what humans do, but our ideas about how the sun turns sort of on its axis and how the universe itself moves, how the solar system moves around the sun, yada, yada, yada. None of that really gets impacted by what we think. So,
can I pause? Craig, and just ask another question, because you had us read stuff from Plato that I'm glad we read these things, but there are other famous things from Plato that we haven't read. Like I remember hearing about over and over and over again these ideal Platonic forms and stuff that Aristotle seems to be referencing here. Why don't we read that? Like, is that why didn't you put that one on the list? Like that seems relevant, and
because there's only so much I can get you to read a week. I'm trying to make it a manageable amount of reading.
I don't disagree there, because it is.
It's not something that I won't eventually cover. It's just, I wanted to make it something that the majority of people will read in a week.
Okay.
So that's the only reason. You'll notice that some of the others I've said you could, these are the books I want you to read in the Republic. You can do the rest of them if you really, really want to. I'm not going to stop you. I actually recommend it. But don't blame me if you get bogged down. So
it was definitely worth reading the whole thing, I would say.
Yeah,
I agree too. I'm actually about that far away from finishing all of the sort of Britannica and Harvard's version of the literary canon, which has taken me till 51 years of age to do. Well, while also studying and trying to read the Loeb library for classics. And I've only got one little bit of everyone's favorite psychologist. He's actually in there, Mr. Freud, there to finish, and then I'm done.
Amazing.
That doesn't mean I've finished reading. It just I've still got another 400 books in the Loeb library. Yes, and I'm actually more looking forward to some of the Loeb. But anyway, so we've got to understand the transcendental and go past Plato's idea of a concept. So to Aristotle, I see this in much the same way. The concept of thinking about the ideal chair, the ideal dog, is a little bit insufficient. I'm sorry, but what is an ideal dog? Do you take a bit of a Great Dane and a little bit of poodle? And I mean, it's sort of doggy. I mean, yeah. I mean, we can say, yes, we can recognize a dog and there's something in there, but I would actually say that it's much more than the idealized version. I'd say that there's a number of representations that act together to help form a dog. And then even if it's not ideal, we can still recognize it. So that probably will be important for a lot of machine learning tasks if people learn to move beyond some of the dead ends we're going down still. And we are. Because we need to move into something where we have symbolic logic and much more. But anyway, that's a different topic. All right, so Aristotle, we have lots of lost sources there. It is so tragic that we're not recording all this stuff. It would be really nice if we created this sort of body of knowledge that we never lose. That was actually one of the key aspects of some of the stories in Asimov as well. Asimov, imagine a world 10,000 years from now or more, and like the idea of psychohistory and historians who go back into computerized records. Think about it. I mean, the Dune world, for instance, 30,000 plus years in the future. Do you really think we're going to just know everything that's happened, especially with more and more knowledge? So the concept there is, if we have all this knowledge, we're still not going to know it all, and people will get it wrong and forget it, and mythologies will develop, and people will have to go back and read it all and still find. And as someone who studies history, I can tell you that even then you have to read many things with a pinch of salt. I like Thucydides, but the guy has a chip on his shoulder and he's very biased. He's very anti-democracy. He likes his aristocracy. And you have to remember some of these biases. And even in history, you have to read between the lines and notice what isn't being reported. So if some of the other scholars around the time do cover something, but he doesn't, why? If some event happens, why is it noted? So this is another aspect of thinking about what we do and don't see, the seen and the unseen, so to speak. If someone puts down, oh, John was very tall, and they note something about it, or something was very old, then this is a sort of reference where we get extra evidence about a anomaly that gets noted only because they're different. So the fragmentary documentation, we need to try and read between some of these lines. And that means that we're not always going to have an accurate portrayal. Again, I quite like Aristotle. He's generally very good. He covers his bias very well, but equally, he has his own biases. We all do. So he writes in such a way that covers his perspective. So even when he is criticizing others, it's in order for his ideas. And that's something we need to remember. So Aristotle started diverging from Plato. I mean, he trained under him. He learnt sort of the Socratic methods. He, even in his early days, would have been dialectic and wrote things in the same sort of format. But what we see is, as he went on, he started to learn his own methodologies, and he developed logic and he developed other structures. And personally, despite all of the footnotes to Plato bit, I actually think I actually give more credence to old Aristotle there. I actually think he was closer to the effect of truth. You've seen my opinion, or heard my opinion rather, on the Republic and other utopian things. So,
well, having read the Republic, it's kind of like, yeah, I can't see how a society built on this premise would actually ever.
Yes, we just need to change humanity, and everything will be good.
Destroy the family unit, you know, and it'll be great.
So we've got Procrustes, the guy who made you fit in his bed, and if you were too long, he would cut bits off, and if you're too short, he would stretch you out. So I don't know how, I can't remember exactly what it was, because I have to try and convert cubits to centimeters, and I'm not going to do that. I'm tired after flying back from Dubai. Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, you're too long for this bed. I'll just cut your feet off.
There you go. Now you can sleep tight.
Yeah. Or, oh, yeah, no, you're 3 inches too short. I better put you in the rack for a little bit. Make you fit in there properly. So, yeah. Anyway, we need to start understanding causation and what makes the world go. So this is a aspect of modern science that we think is completely new, but Aristotle had been working on this, and unfortunately a lot of other people didn't keep going with it. But if we want to understand the universe, we want to understand why things work, then we need to start thinking about the basic functioning of root causes of things. Why, how, where, what, why. And in doing this, we can start, well, one, understanding the universe, explaining it, and creating modern engineering, modern science, modern everything else, which equally leads us to what some people, including a lot of 18th and 19th century writers, our famous little romantics and others, authors, political authors such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and people like that, the romantic idea, who, yeah, isn't that terrible? We've actually ruined the universe by explaining it. Yeah, I prefer to explain my universe, not just leave the magic. Now, this is something that can also come as you learn more and more. That childhood wonder disappears, but then there's so many more things to replace it if you keep looking. That's the way I look at it. So yes, the magic goes, and it seems boring, but is it really? There's so many more problems, and I don't believe humanity's ever going to come to the end of them.
Yeah, people just stop inquiring and they lose the sense of wonder. You have to continue to be curious.
So, yeah, we had this awe and mystique in the past. We'd look and go, oh, is the sun going to come up tomorrow? And then kill someone to make sure that the gods knew that we'd sacrificed properly and everything will hold together. The Brahma idea of every 100 years, Brahma dies, period of chaos, everything comes back together. I'm not quite sure how that fits on like the boundary line. Do we get rebuilt, sort of remembering without the chaos bit? But yeah, anyway, it's
interesting to have that example of the blood sacrifice, and then to have the Spanish who really understood that the mathematical model, to be able to come in and say, hey, look, there's an event tomorrow. We can trick these guys into believing that we can converse with the sun god by saying, hey, if you don't agree to us, we're going to make it disappear. And all this is,
Yes, it's interesting as well. I associated with a number of humanities sort of courses in a number of universities here and in other places in Europe. And I know professors who would argue that by stopping the Aztec sort of sacrifices, that interference was bad. The same as they argue that stopping Sooty, which was a cultural part of some of the Indian religions, or Thuggy, is bad because that's their culture. But I'm sorry, yeah, I don't really care. Murder's murder. And if it's part of your culture, then yeah, too bad.
I'm sure the million mothers who lost their children to sacrifice would contend that it was good that they stopped.
Well, depends on which ones. There probably would have been some mothers who gave their children up. But yeah. So Aristotle notes all inquiry begins in a state of wonder and bafflement. Ask anyone starting to learn calculus, and it's probably how they feel. After you've done it for a while, it becomes easy and boring. And I have problems teaching my daughter because you just go, but there's a rule there, you just do it. And she goes, why? So I'm terrible at teaching this stuff because I don't remember the bafflement bit and trying to explain that. It's just that formula. Why? Because if you blah blah blah, you explain it, and yeah, but why? Why do you choose that one? Well, that's the one you do when this sort of anyway. Yeah. What can I say? I'm not good at teaching certain things at a certain age. All right, so metaphysics, old science of being bit. We have to remember law of non-contradiction. This is the key basis of all of our mathematics, science, etc. If we don't agree with this one, then we're going to have lots and lots of problems. I don't care whether you're postmodern or not. If we don't understand the basic that if you don't have truth and falsity different, and they're not sort of non-contradictory, then you can't even explain those things. So it's a self-evident principle, which is really the heart of what an axiom is. It's a starting point which we can build all other rational aspects of thought. And if we don't accept that axiom, then we don't really go anywhere from there. So self-evident means it's easier to hold. I mean, it's rather difficult if you can't get someone to accept 1 + 1 = 2. I mean, the proof of that is axionomic. You have to accept that if you have one thing and I have another thing, I have two things. That's definitional. It's an axiom of mathematics. There isn't any lower proof than that is. So if you don't accept the basics of how we define these things, then it's really not much we can even say, other than a postmodern sort of garbage word salad. But anyway, that's my opinion on postmodernism. So arguing without contradiction is a dead end. There's not really much we can do. We may as well go home, or at least grab a beer and enjoy the sunset. So, objectivist and realist. Now, oops, not that jump. Going back to where that jumped. There we go. Okay, Protagoras, known as a relativist. We don't actually have any of his works, so we've got to take everyone else's opinion of him, which isn't always good, but he was a sophist, and not everyone likes sophists, especially our friends like Socrates and Plato. So if we have a relativistic sort of aspect, not of like in physics, but in everyone has their own view of things. We have a lot of this in the humanities right now, with the whole, oh, that's their cultural opinion and blah, blah, blah. And we're not going to address things objectively, then we're really getting to a dead end. We're now getting into non-arguments. So empiricist view from Aristotle, what appears to our senses must be true. Maybe, maybe not. That in itself is indeterminate. The reason being is, well, think of all the optical illusions. So we need to go beyond just going, I've seen it, therefore it must be true. That goes for everything. So how else can we test what we have seen? Remember I don't know if you remember, but the psychological experiment where people are focusing on numbers and counting, etc., on the stage, and then a guy in a gorilla suit runs around, dances in front of them a little bit, goes off, and everyone's still counting. And then at the end, the person asks, so what did you see on stage? And they go, nothing. Did you see a monkey? No. What do you mean? And our focus is our world. If we're not focusing on something, it doesn't exist for us. So that's one part of this. But remember, all those optical illusions, that's all going to change what we see and do. And there are other ways of testing, and making sure that we test what we see is important. So change of state, different sensations. While it's possible that different people experience things differently, that's something we're not measuring the same thing. So maybe you're someone that would be called a super taster, and there are people who have more sensitive taste buds than others, and they probably go and work in a factory where they test chocolate or wine or one of these things and get
tea,
if they're lucky, tea, all that sort of fun stuff. But if you get someone who is more adept at tasting, they've got those extra sensations, then saying, is that sweet to those two people isn't a contradiction. It is a difference between a class of people testing. So that's something to remember as well. And that is not a relativistic difference, but we have to note that different people can have different empirical sort of views and perceptions. So focus is important as well. What are we looking at? Now, the other aspect of all of this is the law of the excluded middle. So we can't find something that allows us to create non-binary statements that leave open-ended predicates that are neither true or false. We need to create things that exist in one state or the other. So it's no good sitting there going, well, we want to test whether that is a black swan or a white swan, but it's actually painted half white and half black. Then that is a different thing altogether, and we have to actually take it out and analyze things properly. We can't just pull things out and argue half and half and all this stuff. We need to ensure that we create statements that are able to be argued consistently. If we find postulates that annihilate themselves and leave contradictions, then we know we need to check our premises, because we have a huge problem. We're wrong. So if we can't define things well, then that is part of the problem. So reality follows non-contradiction. Well, we have that argument that it doesn't. There are plenty of people out there who will argue that reality itself doesn't follow non-contradiction. Remember, we've got our various people who will argue that we're a dream of God. Maybe, maybe not, but that doesn't help us do anything in life. It doesn't help us understand the universe. It only helps us move to Tibet and wear an orange sheet and chant a bit. And that's not my interest, so I don't really feel like getting orange sheets and chanting. So I will stick with reality. I like reality. So everything is opposite was a taken position by Hegel, and Yeah, that doesn't really get us anywhere either. And Hegelian philosophy led to a whole lot of problems in postmodern BS. So we won't get into any of that for a while. But the concept here was everything is in the state of becoming. Now, while you can argue that things change, the boy becomes the man, becomes the ... The girl becomes the woman. That's a different argument, in my opinion. So again, it's moving the goalposts. So we are basically finding another logical fallacy not to address the actual problem. And that is very common in postmodern thought. So while Heraclitus argued that all things are in constant flux, change, variance, that doesn't mean we can't define them. Just because you're going to be in two different places doesn't mean you can't define what place A and place B might be. It might be that we need to grab a little bit of old Newton's calculus there and do some differential equations or other such sort of attempts at understanding what is occurring. Or maybe we need to understand the process of an individual learning and growing and aging. But these are still things we can investigate and come to understand. That could be, in modern terms, a qualitative study where we interview people, we come to gain a psychological understanding of how children learn. But again, it's still something that we can build knowledge on, we can contradict, we can say, in the majority of cases, this is how it is, but there are some children that are different because of these reasons. So it is not merely the clash of opposites, as people like to say. And if we do find contradictions, then it really comes down to we need to step back and go, what is wrong with my argument? So there we go. Okay, so lots of questions for you to think about these in this bit. I won't go into all of this tonight because, as I said, I'm actually a little bit tired, and the fun of coming back from overseas with a very quick trip. But I want you to have a bit of a think as you're reading. What is the doctrine of Heraclitus there, Anaxagoras? Can perception act to give us true knowledge? So we talked a little bit about empirical thought, the ability to fool what we see. So what do we need to get true knowledge? How do we do that? How often do we need to test things? And remember now that we have modern techniques are all fairly much probabilistic, and we test something either against an alpha of 5, alpha of 1, where we're 99% certain, etc., that in this test that we have captured the true population mean, which isn't necessarily the way that people explain confidence intervals, but I'm not going to get into that one for tonight. The methodologies here, the distinctions between a philosopher and a natural sort of scientist are all important. The reason for the cause of things is wisdom, a divine science, etc. These are all aspects of trying to understand the world, and I want you to think how that differs from Plato's theories. The incorporation of non-natural items and goods, and the search for an idea of a final cause. So, questions?
Okay.
Are
there's
we
a
all
lot
good?
to go through here. So I'm going to actually go back to the book. And so I've taken a copy of these questions, and we'll probably post in the Slack.
No questions. But I will say, this was the first time, Craig, we didn't get your document up front, so I don't have the whatever you wrote down or whatever.
Oh, we didn't? I thought I dropped it in there.
I don't think I
I haven't seen it. Actually,
well,
Yeah,
I'll make sure that you get it right after this. I'll
Okay.
drop it in the group. It should have been.
that's all right.
Hmm.
I had one comment, one of my takeaways, which was a bit of a sort of a mind blown moment in the book, which is where he's describing the concept of infinity and the idea that by definition, something infinite, there can only be one infinite thing in the universe, because by definition, it actually consumes the whole universe. Or it occupies all space in the universe, if you like. I thought that's actually quite profound when you think about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, in a finite universe, I don't believe you can have an infinite, personally. I mean, what is it by
extends
definition?
beyond, everything that we can understand.
Yep. So I have just dropped week 6, and I'll drop week 7 in a moment to get you a little bit extra. But yeah, I mean, the concept of infinity is problematic in itself. Unbounded is one thing, but there's always something bigger. We can always go bigger. And sitting there and going, oh, well, we can create the infinite. Well, we can't do the infinitely small. We can't do the infinitely big. We end up with lots of problems time and time again. And infinity is a very good mathematical tool. But we've got to remember that mathematical tools don't need to be real. I mean, they are not always real. And that's something people don't seem to understand. It's not like Plato and trying to objectify these ideals. We should be thinking about, are they actually there? Are they something, or are we just putting this on the world ourselves? And that will be both 6 and 7. So you can't complain I haven't got that one. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So welcome.
Just for next week, will we be returning to the normal schedule? So
we should be, yes.
Okay, so we'll be back on in 3 days' time.
Yep. Okay. So
perfect.
There you go.
All right.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Craig.
Yes,
no
thank
problem.
you, Craig.
And you just need your hoodie there in orange, and it would sort of look like you've got the Tibetan thing.
You're right. It is that color. It's kind of cool.
In that color, it looks more like Jedi type one.
I've got my little prayer spinner here.
Yep, we can have Ryan with his Jedi sword.
I'm okay with that. That'll work.
No problem. All right. Have a great night.
See you guys.